Welcome to the Real Talk Retirement Show, where we explore the financial side of retirement and beyond. Whether you're currently retired or planning for the future, we offer real, relatable conversations about money and personal finances. Most importantly, we dive into all these topics using real talk. Now, let's get real about your money and your retirement.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Real Talk Retirement Show. This is season 2, episode 2, and we're delighted that you joined us again. We are Brian Graff and Tracy Burke, as always, from Conrad Siegel. And we have another good topic for you today. I guess I'm biased, Tracy. I think they're all good. I
Yeah.
probably say that at the beginning of every podcast we do. But this is one that I really like because as a retirement coach at Conrad Siegel, I get these phone calls all the time.
Yeah.
And that is from the people who are maybe getting closer to retirement and they want to know if they're doing enough and oftentimes they feel like they're not doing enough. So with that in mind, we're calling this episode Saving for Retirement When You're Older and Need to Catch Up.
Yeah.
So, today's episode is really for anyone who feels a little bit behind, late to the game would be another way to describe it, or just worried that retirement might be out of reach. And by the way, for those of you who don't feel behind, definitely stay tuned because there will be some tips for you as well later in the episode. But, let's start with a quick question. So I do ask that all our listeners are honest with themselves for this one. But when you hear the word retirement, do you feel excited or slightly panicked? I'm guessing it's probably a combination of the two for a lot of people. And Tracy, I spoke with someone recently, and we're going to call him Mark just to protect the innocent. But Mark is 53 years old, and I remember that because he's exactly 1 year older than me. And he had a successful career. It seems like he's got a great family life. But once we kind of got through the introductions and the formalities of the conversation, and we started looking at his retirement account, I could almost feel his stomach drop right through my phone. And what he said to me was, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, was something like, I feel like I missed the boat. Everyone else I know started saving at 25. I didn't. Right. So if that sounds familiar to our listeners out there, trust me when I say you are not alone. And more importantly, you're not out of options.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Brian. They are not alone. So yeah, today, we're going to talk about why catching up is really more common than most people would think, right? And we're going to figure out, what actually matters most at this stage of life in the game, and offer some real practical steps that folks can take, really starting now. So again, just to reiterate to our listeners, Brian, as you mentioned, throughout today's conversation, we're going to talk about, strategies, for preparing for retirement really later in your career. And as you mentioned, this not only applies just to those that may have that feeling of, wow, I feel behind, but it really, applies to everyone else as well. So it's a universal thing, no matter how much you're making or what your income levels are. So really, what I'm trying to say is this is not an episode about guilt or missed opportunities either, right? It's really about taking control and then just making the most of the time you still have.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said earlier, you're definitely not alone. And people ask the question, what's normal? And the
Yeah.
truth is that many people don't start seriously saving for retirement until their 40s or their 50s.
Yeah.
We all know that life happens. Raising kids, they're expensive. Trust me, I can attest to that. Paying back student loans, we have car loans, mortgages, saving for college. I could go on and on and on. Even possible career changes may set back your finances a little bit. Other people struggle with divorce or caregiving challenges for their children or possibly even their parents. So tremendous challenges exist for many people. So, in a lot of ways, Tracy, this is not your fault.
Absolutely. And as a financial planner, we often talk about that importance of starting early, and we hear that in through folks hear that through their employers and through other advisors. Oh, you got to start, super early to be successful. And while it's true and it's more helpful,
Yeah.
likely the earlier you start, that's sort of that perfect retirement saver. Sort of that one that
Yeah.
starts at age 22, saves, whatever, that 10 to 15% number of the retirement income. They never stop saving, they never make any mistakes. The truth is that that person really rarely exists, right? It's
Right.
not
Sure.
such a common thing that's almost uncommon. So this starting later is normal because of a lot of those reasons you mentioned, Brian. But the real danger is not, when you sort of realize it, is making adjustments, and do some planning, obviously, if you're able to.
Yeah, for sure. And if you happen to be in your 20s and you tuned into this episode of the podcast, although the title or the subject matter might not have attracted you to it, but I hope you're here. I hope you're listening. Definitely do that. Do what Tracy said. Start saving when you're early.
Yeah.
You definitely will be thankful that you did, but we realize that most people, I don't want to say all, but certainly quite a few people are in the situation where we said they start later in life. However, Tracy, you do have three advantages when you're in that situation, when you're in your 40s and 50s. The first advantage to kind of catching up on your retirement savings is that these are typically your higher income years, right? So for most people, peak earnings years often happen later in your career, somewhere in your 40s, 50s, and your 60s. And because of that, that allows you to save larger dollar amounts, even if, over fewer years.
Yeah, that's right, Brian. And something else for those over the age of 50, there's something called catch-up contributions. And mo many folks are aware or know about this, but basically, the IRS and federal regulators set these standards up that allow retirement savers to do these catch-up contributions. So again, starting at age 50, the standard is, and depends on if it's your workplace retirement plan. So think your 401k, 403b, whatever your workplace offers. To put some numbers to it, here in 2026, the regular retirement account, workplace retirement account contribution amount is $24,500. Now, again, there's people saying, well, that's outlandish. I can never get there. But let's, assume it's maybe later in life or ideally you can get there at some point, right? If you max that out, 24,500, those over 50 can catch up and add an extra $8,000. So that amounts to 32,500 here in 2026 that people age 50 or over can save in their workplace plan if their finances and their situation allows. Now, if you're thinking, well, I don't have a workplace plan or I have an IRA and what can I do in my IRA? Those numbers are less, but the regular contribution in an IRA this year is 7,500. The catch up is actually 1,100, and that started to inflate this year for the first time. It's been 1,000 for quite a few years. It's going to inflate each year. So 7,500 normal plus the catch up of 1,100 takes us to $8,600 as as what age 50 do. And then, of course, to complicate things, and sometimes government can make things less easy, but this came from a law that was passed, I think it was in 2022, a couple years ago. They added a bonus. So they picked the ages 60 to 63. So that's a 4-year period of time, right? The inclusive ages between when you hit 60 and through age 63. They allow you to save an additional, on top of what those numbers we just mentioned, another $3,250 on top of all those numbers we just talked about. And then all of a sudden, when you turn 64, assuming you're still working, you go back to the normal catch-up one. So it's really a quirky part of the rule. And frankly, I think to those of us who are in the business of administering it, it's just another complexity. But that's how the rules work. And again, the federal government really designed these catch-up rules and catch-up contributions to help people that might have more cash flow as they get closer to retirement and help those late starters.
Yeah, great point. Definitely though. But 60 to 63, that's a head scratcher a little bit, Tracy. Like, why those exact years? We don't know, but it's a good thing, right? So any
Yeah.
chance you have to save additional money for retirement, we're not going to scoff at too much there. The next advantage you have later in your career, I don't know, Tracy, what's the expression? With age comes wisdom.
Yeah. Yep.
Still maybe waiting for that to kick in a little bit. So I'm gonna soften that statement and say that oftentimes with age comes a clearer perspective on things. So for most people, your financial well-being is likely better later in your career, and you likely have a clear sense of your financial priorities. Children are out of the house, hopefully. Debt may be significantly lower, so forth and so on. So it's just easier to get a clear perspective on finance. If you learned a lot over the years, hopefully life has gotten a little bit easier financially speaking, and that's really important later in your career. You also may be more grounded, we'll say, with your investment portfolio,
Hmm.
since you've likely experienced many ups and downs over your investment lifetime and learned a lot of lessons along the way. You may be less likely to either panic during times of market turmoil or maybe less likely to chase some of those riskier investments.
Yeah, and Brian, thinking about, being a little bit, having that clearer perspective as you get older. Wife likes to remind me that men take longer to mature, right? So we're a little
Yeah.
bit behind our female counterparts there, and I think she's still waiting for me to grow up in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Uh,
we're all in the same boat, Tracy. I can't argue that at all.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing that this is going to come a shock to to our listeners likely, but and I say that facetiously, but it's so important to do some planning. Once you sort of are in this, at any stage, planning is important, but especially if you come to that realization or the later years in retirement, whether you feel prepared or not, do some planning. This is when you need to figure out what you need to do. It's not just, as simple as what's my number? How much do I need or how much should I have by now? Right? There are benchmarks and that's sometimes where you'll see a benchmark and think, okay, here's my age and it says I should have this amount of time of my income or whatever the dollar amount is. And wow, I don't have that. But really focusing, do the planning, think about what your financial future should look like. So things like, figuring out what you want your retirement to look like, what that desired lifestyle is. Is it sitting on a beach? Is it having a second home? Is it none of those? Is it much simpler than that? So it'll guide what really you need, that lifestyle, of course. Expected, when you want to retire, the when behind it, right? What age you want to go out. And do you have flexibility with that? From that perspective. What are your income sources? Besides maybe your investment, your 401k or other investments. What can you count on from Social Security? Now, if folks are like, I don't know, how do I know that? A quick aside, SSA.gov, Social Security Administration. That's what SSA.gov stands for. You can log on if you haven't, and it'll give you a retirement estimate and all those. It's a secure website, and that's a good way to check that out. But besides figuring out what you could expect from Social Security, your pensions, maybe you're going to work part-time in retirement. Maybe you have rental properties that are going to provide income. So again, just figuring that out. And then I would just say, once you've taken that inventory and really got a better sense of what your goals are and what you have and what you can expect, as we talked about, preparing for today's conversation, Brian, we came up with three important levers that we believe people can use. So, Brian, why don't you walk us through that first lever?
All right, but I'm having a hard time concentrating, Tracy. You mentioned retiring to the beach, and Tracy and I are here in central Pennsylvania. We're supposed to get over a foot of snow in the next couple of days. So, yeah, retiring to the beach sounds phenomenal. But I'm going to try and get back and focus on the rest of the podcast, Tracy. Yeah. So, Tracy just said we have three important levers that we can use. The first lever is your savings rate, and it's probably the most important. And the reality is, and you may not like hearing this, but you simply will likely have to just save more. I know that isn't easy, but hopefully, again, you're in a position to redirect some of your current cash flow to more retirement savings. Consider increasing your retirement contributions anytime you get a raise or a small bump in pay, or if you get bonuses. Those are great times to put extra money into your retirement savings account. Or, like we said earlier, hopefully your budget allows you to save more coming down the home stretch of your final working years. So really super important, save, save, save.
Yeah. So lever two is time. And we would say even just a little bit helps. So besides that saving more that Brian just talked through, you can or may need to work longer than planned or desired. Now, sometimes the longevity at our work sometimes it's out of our control for a variety of reasons, health or other issues, right? So maybe we can't always count on it, but if that is available, sometimes just extending the amount that we want to work could do it, and we're not talking like a decade, even a couple years, for many 2 or 3 years working, longer, often dramatically improves that outcome. And we've talked quite a bit in the past, Brian, about compounding, how compounding effect and the
Mhm.
compounding interest, right? And it, just simply means that you won't need to provide retirement income if you do work an extra 2 or 3 years. It'll be for 2 or 3 years less, of course. But also those additional savings and the investment growth and the compounding of all those during that extra period of time, those extra few years, simply means more income to take. So by working longer, it also can affect that Social Security component. If you can delay Social Security because you're working a little longer, sometimes those things can be a little bit helpful. So time can also be a lever to pull on.
For sure. So save more, save a little bit longer. And then also our third and final lever would be, take account of your investment strategy. Maybe it's time to review this again. And we do recommend at least once a year you're looking at your investments. So hopefully you have been along the way. But again, for those who are late in their careers, approaching retirement, feel a little bit behind, you may need to make some changes to your investment portfolio to balance your growth and your risk goals. So this could mean potentially investing slightly more aggressively, but still with a nice diversified,
Yeah.
disciplined approach. Still avoiding those ultra risky Hail Mary type of
Hmm.
investments, right? Where you're trying to make all the money back quickly. And that we all know can often backfire and even do more damage than it does good.
Yeah. So three important levers that are at, folks' sort of disposal at that point in time. But let's talk as we're sort of coming down the home stretch, talk about common mistakes that sometimes folks will make when they're in this situation where, maybe later in their career, and again, it could apply if you need to catch up or just in general terms from there. So the first one, and this really piggybacks on what you were just talking about with investment strategy, Brian,
Mhm.
and it amounts to going too conservative too early. We've heard certain generations have that tendency to maybe, and rightfully so, feel that they need to be more conservative than maybe they really should be from that standpoint. So we just need to balance that need for growth with the need for safety. So that means likely a mix of both stocks and bonds, those two main asset classes. You can't just, when you approaching retirement or in retirement, just throw everything into a bank CD and hope everything's going to be okay. You still need an exposure to that and some investment risk. The other thing I'm going to also piggyback on what one thing I think you call it a Hail Mary type of
Yeah.
investment, right? And it's another common mistake is folks saying, "Well, I'm behind, so I have to take more risk, and I'm going to chase some hot what are dubbed as those hot investments." We would strongly advise stick with the tried and true approach and not that sort of Hail Mary attempt. So that some maybe Hail Mary investments, could be Bitcoin. Well, they say Bitcoin is going to grow to, $1 gazillion, per Bitcoin in coming years. So let's put a lot of money into that. Or Nvidia is doing well, or whatever it might be. Try to avoid those. That's really chasing hot investments. They've done well at least some of those, the Nvidia in particular, maybe not the Bitcoin, but looking backwards. But is it going to continue going at that clip going forward? Likely not. So be tried and true approach there, right? And then the other component, I had on my list was ignoring taxes. We see some folks that just don't think about taxes, especially as they get into retirement. And so it's an area that's often underestimated. So just having an effective strategy that deals with taxes effectively and efficiently is really important. So, Brian, those are a couple things that I was thinking of as common mistakes. What are some other things that you can share?
Sure. So I think another big one is people tend to underestimate healthcare costs in retirement.
Yep.
It can be easy to do, easy to overlook, but it really can be a big part of your retirement budget. Healthcare is not cheap, and when your working days are over, maybe you don't have that employer-sponsored insurance program. You really need to know what's under the hood and what type of programs are out there. So definitely don't underestimate healthcare. Another thing I would tell everybody to avoid, it's that term we say keeping up with the Joneses, right? So
Yeah,
don't compare your plan to what somebody else is doing or to somebody else's plan. Don't worry about what others think or what their plan is. Really just focus on what's best for you and for your family. That's a huge one, Tracy, right? Don't you get that a lot with your
absolutely.
conversations with people?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's so easy to think about, well, geez, my neighbor, my friend's doing
yeah.
this, and whether it's traveling or, all kinds of other stuff.
For sure. Okay, Tracy, let's wrap up as we always do by giving our viewers some action items from today's episode. Do you want to kick us off there?
Yeah. So, if somebody's out there thinking and listening to this and feeling, well, geez, this does apply to me, whether I'm closing in on a retirement or I do need to play catch up or whatever it is. It's just, awareness is, of course, that first step, and then action is the next one. So I would just remind folks that it doesn't have to be a perfect plan. There's sometimes in life where we try to think, okay, what we're going to do, it has to be perfect before we can start going in that direction.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I would just encourage folks, it's okay to be messy. Messy is perfectly fine. It's better to be messy than perfect and at least get a start with it. So, and the key is as long as you're making progress, right? So there have been a lot of people over time who started to save late in the game and have done very, very well and met their goals. So again, it can be messy. It's not too late. What are a couple, maybe more tangible things, Brian, that you have?
Right. Well, the first one, again, is increasing your contribution rate whenever possible, and definitely running some real numbers, whether you've got website tools available to you through your employer-sponsored retirement plans website, or you go out there and search for some, independent calculators online, or definitely sitting down with a professional. We can't stress that one enough, that a good advisor is worth their weight in gold, especially later in your career. And with all this stuff, remember, yeah, this sounds a little bit bleak, but the best time to start was years ago, right? But the second best time is today. So don't forget that. It's never too early or too late to get started with your retirement goals. So, Tracy, thanks so much for being with me here again today. As always, we are going to wrap up this episode 2 of season 2 now, but we do encourage all of our listeners to continue to reach out to us with questions or comments. You can reach us at podcast@conradsiegel.com. We are truly here to help, which we sure hope you know by now. And definitely, if you like this content, share it with your friends, your family, your coworkers, and give us a 5-star review if you're so inclined, and subscribe if you haven't already. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for tuning into today's show. The Real Talk Retirement Show is created and produced by Conrad Siegel, an advisory firm that specializes in helping people prepare for retirement and beyond. If you want to learn more about our work or meet the team, you can visit conradsiegel.com. Information on this show is for educational purposes only and should not be considered personalized investment, tax, or legal advice. Before making decisions, you should consult with the appropriate professionals for advice that is specific to your situation.